A Moment in His Presence presents Divine Encounters with Joyce, Todd, and Kim Bradley.
Hi, welcome back to A Moment in His Presence, where we're presenting our new series, Divine Encounters. And today we're going to start with Bathsheba. And if you want to learn more about Bathsheba, you can find her story in 2 Samuel, the 11th chapter, as well as the first chapter of 1 Kings. Now, what we all know about Bathsheba is that her beauty captured the attention to David and led to adultery and murder. And you know, the thing is when we think about Bathsheba being called to David, you know, Joyce, we don't know if she could have said no. We don't know what her thought pattern was in going up there. But what we do know is when she got there, she participated in that act of adultery. And so she is not exonerated just because she didn't know what was going to happen.
And the fact that David was the king and called Bathsheba to him, perhaps she was thinking that he was going to give her news about her husband who was off in war, that he may have been killed or hurt. Right. But nevertheless, the king's son, first of all, he had the lust of the eyes. And then he summoned her, she went, and then the adulterous affair happened. But the scriptures never says anything where Bathsheba said anything until she found out something about herself, and she sent a message to David saying 3 words: I am pregnant. Right. That's when she first spoke.
Exactly. And you know what, whenever we sin, there are consequences, and a consequence of this particular sin is that they lost that baby. Yes. That first baby that was born, they lost it. And it talked about David grieving, but the grieving of a mother.
Yes. And you know, Kim, when you thinking about grieving, you know, first of all, I think she grieved over that loss of respect for herself in that, you know, doing that adulterous act. And then the loss of her husband, because of course David had her husband killed, and so she lost her husband. And now here the baby is lost. That's a lot of grief, y'all. Have you ever experienced grief in your life? Have you lost a loved one, a child even? I know I've experienced. I lost my mother and my father that was so dear to me. And so what we have to remember is that God is able to turn our mourning into joy. And like Bathsheba, he was turning her ashes into joy. Ashes into
beauty.
Ashes into beauty.
Did. But you know, God is so faithful.
I know that.
God is so faithful. You know, out of all the wives that David had, God used Bathsheba to bring forth Solomon, which meant beloved by God, who ended up being the wisest man ever.
Yes. And you know, God had already chosen Solomon to be the next king after his father David. And his other son by another wife was trying to forcibly take over the throne, but Bathsheba had the courage to go to David because he was near death, to remind him that God had already chosen Solomon to become the next king. And so she let him also know what the other son was doing against God's will. And because of that, David had Solomon anointed as king. And the one thing I like about him is it says in scripture that when he became king, he had a seat brought and put on the throne that his mother could sit at his right side.
And so in Solomon honoring his mother, it's like God had honored her. He did not hold her sin against her. So when you find yourself caught up in something, yes, you may have to face the consequences. But God is not going to use it with her. As to the point that she was actually included in the genealogy of Jesus Christ. So don't beat yourself up when you find yourself in a situation. Face some consequences, but know that God is going to bring you through. Because after all, you are the apple of his eye.